Trill seas are purple, Bajoran seas are green, and Gabriel Bell is the hero that history leaves unseen. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
We're also joined by very special guest, Deep Space Nine writer, Mr. Robert Hewitt Wolf. And also, it looks like somebody catching up on their Deep Space Nine information just to make sure he doesn't get anything wrong. Mr. Ira Steven Behr.
Oh, right.
You know that Michael Dorn played Worf?
You remember that show, Deep Space Nine, Ira?
In Terry's book, The Deep Space Nine Companion. And if Terry says it, you know it has to be true.
Yeah, you got to do the intros. You got to let Ira do the intros, man. That was perfect.
I don't know. That rhyme was pretty good, too.
Thank you. Well, Ira and I are going to duke it out between the encyclopedia and the rhyme that I made up that was pretty simple. Very quickly. Yeah, I mean, they mentioned the Trill seas were purple, Bajoran seas were green, right? A couple little lines there when Dax and Kira were noticing the seas on Earth. And Gabriel Bell, what an awesome story. So today we're doing a review of episode 11 of season 3, Past Tense Part 1 of Deep Space Nine. It's directed by Reza Badi.
Reza Badi.
Got it. And oh, by the way, it airs January 2nd, 1995, which is kind of the first thing we wanted to cover here very quickly. As Sirach and I have been reviewing every episode, of season 3 for the last 3 months, this is the window in which there is no other Star Trek series on television. From the beginning of season 3 up until Past Tense Part 2, there's this 12 or 13 episode window where you guys are the only series, and this is all you got as the only series. And I was kind of hoping if you could look back to whatever it was, 1994, the second half of 1994. Do you remember that time? And did you guys feel like, okay, this is our chance to really shine, or were you just business as usual?
Shine! Oh yeah, we were shining. Oh God, yes.
To shine, the studio would have had to pay money to actually promote us, I think, during that window.
Yeah.
There was no shining.
No shining.
It was definitely business as usual. I mean, the truth is, there was so much attention that had been paid to the end of TNG, and that was being paid to the ramping up towards Voyager, that, whatever. We were always the middle child.
Wasn't there?
And the movie, and Generations was like...
Yeah, so, come on.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There was First Contact, which was such a big movie, and it was that year. You're right.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, not much shining.
Nah.
And that's just the way we liked it. That's what we told one another.
You know what? What shines to me is the actual episode. This episode is probably one of the best episodes I think I've seen so far up to this point. I love when you guys take the characters outside of the station and kind of do something really quirky and different by putting them somewhere else. And in this case, in 2024 in San Francisco. Where did this idea kind of come from?
Well, I think it was Robert and myself both came at it in our own ways. I mean, it started out, Robert, you had the germ of it that you kept pestering about.
So yeah, the germ of it, I had this idea of Cisco waking up in Palisades Park in Santa Monica, in 1995, being woken up by a cop who was like, "Move, you can't sleep here," and Cisco being like, "What's happening? I'm a starship captain." And the idea of whether he really was a starship captain in some kind of weird reality, or whether he was schizophrenic and that Deep Space Nine was all in his mind. And I pitched it to Ira 5 times, and he kept turning me down. And then I think this is my version of the story. So Ira, correct me if I'm wrong, but I knew that Ira was obsessed with Attica, the prison riots at Attica. And so I thought about the idea of putting them into like in a homeless internment camp and then having a big Attica style riot. And that would mean that it wouldn't be 2024, that wouldn't be 1994, that it would be 30 years later. So, or so that it would be early 21st century. So that's how I finally like tricked him into doing it. That's my version.
Yeah, my version is I was obsessed with Attica from Dog Day Afternoon. So however Attica came, whether it came from him or I, but the thing that definitely made it happen, and this I'm certain of, I was down in Santa Monica. I cannot remember why, but I was down in Santa Monica on the promenade there, that grassy promenade. And it was a beautiful day. And I walked down, I was by myself. I wasn't with my wife, which is why I can't remember what purpose I had down in Santa Monica. But I went down to look at the ocean, and there were these homeless people lying there in the grass, and all these people taking photos of each other and the Pacific and all that natural beauty. And literally at one point, somebody walked over the legs of this homeless guy, like not even paying attention to him. And I came back, I think the words I used they were like living statues. That's how people related to them. And it was remarkable. And that's when the whole idea of the sanctuary districts and all that stuff, what are we going to do with the homeless? And so that's what I came back with, and I think that's when the show, came alive. But yeah, it all started out with this idea that later on became something we use for Far Beyond the Stars, which is the idea of Cisco being schizophrenic, or his trying to convince people or thinking he was a possible captain. In Far Beyond the Stars, obviously, he was writing about it. But then, having watched it, I'll say this. I didn't watch part 2. I only watched part 1.
Nice.
I haven't seen it since it aired. And I will say without a doubt, it could have been a better show if we did it in season 5.
Why is that?
Well, because we still had to do a lot of crap that we were trapped into, given the time, where we spent way too much time in this episode talking about chronoton particles and scenes, these terrible scenes with O'Brien and Kira standing there reciting crap that no one cares about. We went through do you remember all the rewrites we went through that did not bother any of the stuff we came up with for time travel? We had to keep coming back with more and more different variations.
Well, that was definitely a time when we were being forced to force feed the audience a lot of technobabble, and the episode suffers a little from that. But I think that the good thing is that, I almost feel like people watching those scenes now and then probably just tune that stuff the hell out, and it's like,
I tuned it out.
I did too. I was like, whatever, I don't care. They'll figure it out. And then, but I think that the scenes that are, the rest of the scenes are pretty good and are still hold up.
They're not just pretty good, in my opinion. I'd say prophetic. And I don't know how you guys came up with all this stuff. I don't know if you're really from the future and just came back to do the show.
If that were true, I would own a lot more Apple stock.
Yeah.
And also, those computers wouldn't be so gigantic. That was my favorite part about it. I was like, "What is that? A
those
printer?"
Computers were super clunky. That's pretty good. But
Well, I thought that was funny too. Just the fact that you're actually trying to do. It's a past tense show showing the future of our present day when you were actually filming. So you have to make a technology that's not that advanced, which is hilarious to me just in itself.
That was our best guess in 1994 what 2024 would look like. And those ties, like the way that the ties were just like a little ribbon, like a little vertical ribbon that Chris Brenner was wearing all the time.
Yeah, the outfits were great. But I just
the
think
fashions were good.
sanctuary district, right? That's the terminology that's used in the episode. But sanctuary cities are where we live in today. And I just want to know, I know this came before that because I didn't hear the terminology sanctuary city when in the 90s when we were doing this. So did the Star Trek fans kind of steal this episode and turn it into that?
Well, I'll tell you where sanctuary came from without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It came from Logan's Run.
Yeah, 100%.
Logan's Run, where they're in the book, they're looking for sanctuary, which is where the guys, once you turn 21 and you have to die, there's a place where you could run and find sanctuary. So that's what we used. And then district, we came up with districts, but sanctuaries from Logan's Run.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I see is that, we have a huge homeless problem here in Los Angeles. Right. And it seems like, I've walked down streets that look like some of the streets that are, featured in this episode.
You bet.
And it's actually sad.
Yeah. I mean, the sad thing is it was already a problem in 1994 when we were writing it. Sure. My wife at the time was working at a shelter, like a treatment facility for the homeless mentally ill, which is part of why I was probably a little more aware of it. But it was already a problem. It's just a problem that has just been accelerated over time. It just hasn't gotten any better. And, a lot of it goes down to like the elimination of a lot of the social service net that made that not happen until the Reagan administration. And it was just like the fallout was already starting then, and it just has never stopped.
That's it.
And Sirach has mentioned a few times. Sometimes I'll try to ask something like, do you prefer cats or dogs? And Sirach will be like, all right, enough out of you. Let's talk about the homeless problem or something like that. Sometimes he'll remind me of things that are a little more important. And it's true. I think, what do we have, like 60,000 homeless people in Los Angeles or a number similar to that. And what you guys put in this episode, what were they called? Ghosts, dims, and gimmies.
Yeah.
And the dims are the ones, that I kind of want to mention right now, because that is something that we do have such a mental illness problem, and that we're not really dealing with it well right now. We're only getting to the point where we're getting educated on it. And of course, they're calling them dims in the episode. But we recognize that right away. You even mentioned schizophrenia, how we can help these people, but rather than help them in the episode, they just put a wall around them, and that's it. Was there anything specific that you wanted to convey there, or were you just like, this is what we're seeing? We're seeing a lot of addicts that are sick in that way. We're seeing a lot of people that are sick with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
Yeah, again, I think coming from my wife's experience more than mine of working with the homeless mentally ill, I had an awareness that a lot of these people were people who could and should be in some sort of treatment program. And, she worked at a program that did bring people in, but it wasn't a lot. I think I don't remember how many residents her program had at a time. But it was, a drop in the bucket, even back then. And, I think we're just continuing to see that. I think, her awareness of it helped inform my awareness of it. And like Ira said, even in 94, you could see like 10 guys, 15 people sleeping in Palisades Park at a given point in time, or on the promenade, or, it was already a problem, a lot of
problem. I mean, you had to be awake and alive and have eyes. I mean, while we were doing the episodes, Mayor Reardon, there was in the LA Times, they were going to find a place where they were going to stash the homeless. I mean,
right after the episode came out, right around the same time.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I brought it into the office. I said, guys, it's happening.
Yeah.
And they decided not to, but that would have been it right there. We would have had, who the hell knows what we would have had, and we might have it still.
I mean, right now, the best, I don't know if it's the best possible version, but there's like a not horrible version of it going on right now, like not more than 2 miles from me, where they've taken the parking lot of this park near me, and they've put 100 like little portable, like little trailers. Like it's a trailer park. They turned it into a trailer park to house the homeless that are vulnerable, so they won't die from COVID. It's basically a way to keep people, to hopefully keep them from getting sick. And like, despite that, I know that there's a fair number of people in there right now, and they're free to go. And like I said, it's probably the most benevolent version of that. But it's still, despite that, you drive down the street not far from me, and there's, or in front of the VA in West LA, and there's 50 tents up outside. So it's just a problem that we're not committing to in the way we need to, or we're finally starting to. I don't know, but we're still.
I mean, before the
30 years later.
Before the COVID, I was shocked. My wife is on the Laurel Canyon, whatever they are, boards or whatever, community, outreach stuff. And it's amazing because you think of Laurel Canyon as a place, the whole hippie and, progressive attitude and stuff like that. And the stuff she reads to me, it's this anger. Where are the police? Get rid of them. All it is about get rid of them. Get rid of them. There's no attempt to understand. There's no attempt to feel or empathize. It's like get rid of them. It's dangerous. They carry disease. It's like demonizing them, and it's the whole non-human thing. Stop thinking them as human beings. It's just this vitriol, and that's Laurel Canyon. So I could just imagine what's going on in other places. People just want their problems to go away, like they want the COVID to go away. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to be involved. They don't want to, help solve the problem. They just want it to disappear.
Part of the problem was that the people on the outside didn't really know what was going on the inside. It was like, once you're in there, people just forgot about you, and that was part of the issue. It was an issue of negligence and lack of human care and kindness and concern.
Yeah.
That the whole idea being that, like, put these people in a sanctuary district, they're taken care of, they're fed, and then never look inside again, never think about what's actually going on in there. It's like, illegal immigrants are crossing the border. Well, we'll put them somewhere in a holding facility, and then we won't look inside that holding facility, or we won't think about what's happening to the children inside that holding facility, or we won't worry about whether they're getting fed or whether they're getting sick or dying, or being sexually assaulted, or all those things. It's out of sight, out of mind, and out of sight, out of mind was one of the sort of big dangers that we were sort of talking about. That sort of, even like, in the most well-intentioned communities, people just want the problem to go away, and then they don't want to think about it anymore. They want to think it's solved, or it's not their problem anymore because they're not seeing people on their street.
I think what you say played out well in the scene with Terry Farrell, with Dax, and the guy that saves
Chris
her
Brenner.
and rescues her. Right.
Yeah.
That moment that they had when she says, but they have walls around there, and what's going on in there. And he kind of has a moment where he's like, oh, like I'm trying not to think about what's happening over there. And now you're forcing me to process this information and actually confront something that we're trying to look away from.
Yeah, that was the idea of that whole B story, was to be able to sort of see the attitudes of the people on the outside, and to see how that attitude was part of the problem, really, maybe even the source of the problem. I mean, also, like, part of the gag that Ira and I were going for was that, Bashir and Cisco, they get thrown in there real fast. 2 brown-skinned men, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But, pretty white girl with some weird tattoos, you're fine. We'll take care of you.
Yeah,
So,
you want to use my computer?
Yeah, you want to use my computer? You want
My home address?
Want to come to a party? You want me to give you some clothing? I'll do all that for you.
At a 5-star hotel for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that did really work well for me, at least when I when I watched it, what I call the 3 M's, Metzler, Miller, and military, the 3 supporting cast members. I had forgotten how good the Chris Brenner character was, because he's this powerful guy, but he's so weak. And I forgot how that Jim Metzler actually captured that sense of, behind all that power is a real kind of empty human being who thinks he's a hero and is nothing like that. And I thought that really came across well. I thought, Dick Miller, who played the older security guard, who no one would have cast as that part. They would have gotten Clancy Brown, some big hulking guy, but Dick is a great character actor, also the godfather of my daughter.
No way.
And I knew Dick would be great in the role because he's so human. And when we do next week's discussion, I got a great story about Avery and Dick that is quite nice, actually.
Oh man, I want to hear it. Oh well.
Oh well.
Yeah, it won't be me though. I just co-wrote the story for that one, so I don't hear.
And I thought, Frank Military, who became in part 2, became an obsession with me because I wanted to show that the guy who killed Gabriel Bell, I didn't want to demonize that character. I wanted to make that character, be more than just the villain of the piece. And so I thought all the actors, and Bill Smitrovich, who plays Webb.
Yeah, Bill is great.
Bill is great. The casting, I thought, was really good. All those people did really, really well.
I can't remember the name of the actress who plays the processing, the intake woman.
She was great.
But she's terrific. Boy, she's good.
So good.
And just carrying the burden of being the people who are actually trying to deal with it, but it's overwhelming and it's too much, and you're just doing your job and you're a little burned out. No, I thought she was terrific too.
Scenes. To be honest, for me, in this viewing, the best scenes were in the processing center. I thought all the scenes felt really good, really true. There wasn't any kind of TV, stretching to make a point. I thought it was done really, really well. So I still have problems watching. I know it's only me, but Avery without the goat and with the hair still annoys the shit out of me.
I didn't remember at the time that this was.
It didn't bother me that much this time.
It bugged me. I gotta say, it bugged me too. And part of it is Avery's. I think part of the issue for the first 3 seasons of the show is that Avery's acting style is it's a little theatrical. It's a little big. And when he's got the hair and no beard, he looks like physically, he looks a little bit like a square. As much as a square as Avery can ever look, And then he's Avery, right? And so there's this weird mismatch, disconnect between the visual of Avery and the soul of Avery in a way. That's what an actor does. They sort of let you see inside their soul, as a great actor does that. And so you're seeing Avery's truth, and on the outside looks like a lie.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. That's really cool.
It's tough,
really
man.
Well said. Really well said.
I myself, I was sold when he picked up that shotgun, though. After he picked up the shotgun and he shot it, then I was like, oh shit, he's back. He's the tough guy. Don't mess with this guy.
Yeah. I tell you what, guys, we got to take a super quick break. But Sirach and I are always noticing how good the casting is. That's one of the themes we keep talking about. On top of the great writing, we're if you guys have ever seen our show, all we talk about is the writing, the casting, the acting, and Sirach notices the wardrobe. And there was actually a wardrobe thing I thought about Sirach with, but we'll have to talk about that later if we have time. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hey everybody, and welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton, Robert Hewitt Wolfe, and Ira Steven Behr. My name's Ryan T. Husk, and I've got Cisco and Bashir behind me. They're also joining us. How you guys doing? Everything good? Nice long break?
Oh, yeah.
we won't get too much into it, but Ira did say that he got himself a refreshing beverage. And you want to show us what it is without any kind of promotion?
There it is. You're converting people, Ryan.
But I especially liked his description of the flavor.
Okay, well, you want to talk about that, or you want to get into the...
I guess we'll get back into the episode.
I want to get into the episode.
One of the things that I had a problem with, and I look back on it now, and I'm not sure that I was right back then. I had a hard time with these type of shows. I was not a big fan of, the issue-oriented Star Trek shows, because I used to say, you're preaching to the converted. The people who are watching the show already have that mindset. So it's all about this. It's all about patting ourselves on the back. Aren't we human? Aren't we, our hearts are in the right place? Big freaking deal, So I would, that's why I kept saying no to both this and Far Beyond the Stars, until I felt there was something that within the story itself, it was worth telling about the characters who we care about. So that's all that's what we were trying to do. The show, even if we had gotten everything wrong, which very possibly could have happened, and usually, like you say, does happen, the show still would have had to have some kind of meaning beyond all that. It still had to talk about the human condition in a way that made that show, worth doing. And I think it did, because that problem of how we deal with the other, how we deal with the culture and people who are different than us, or people, people have this fear. I mean, you're seeing it now come, people have fear of the other, of people of color, because people of color partly are in the history, are people who are disenfranchised and are poor and don't live as well. So we don't want to look at that. Though, that's bad. Keep that away from us, because we don't want to be that. And that those are big things to deal with in a TV show, where you also have to talk about chronoton particles. I mean, it's in ways I wish we would have had more time. Avery, hit me with the idea that Far Beyond the Stars should have been a two-parter, and why didn't we do that? I was watching this and thinking, this could have, if we did it in season 5, we could have done this as a 3-parter. Because what we failed to do, or not failed to do, we didn't have the time to do, is we should have done, instead of talking about it only, we should have done what Bashir was talking about. We should have shown Bashir and Sisko losing a bit of their humanity by living in those conditions. So people that we know, 24th century human beings, stuck in that kind of situation, will not be Starfleet officers, will not be as perfect as they think they are. They will get hungry. They will get grumpy. They will get angry. And that would have been lovely to see. That would have been really challenging to the audience, and that's what you have to do. You have to challenge the audience on a basic level, not whether or not you're getting history right. That's a good thing. I mean, it's a sweet thing that it worked out that way, I guess. Bad for us in 2020.
Yeah. It's supposed to be a cautionary tale, people.
It's all about, okay, we're good. Yes, look at us. Nostradamus.
I think the other reason it feels like we were more accurate than a lot of these shows, what Ira was saying, we weren't really concerned with trying to predict the future. So we didn't spend a whole lot of screen time trying to see what the vehicles looked like, or how people made their livings, or whether there were robots or not, or any of those other kind of things. We didn't go into the futurism. We were very concerned with two very specific places and two very specific groups of people, mostly with what was happening in the Sanctuary District, and then to a lesser extent what was happening outside, in a very, very kind of it's almost a bottle show. They're almost like the two shows almost exist as these very, very small, they're very small and contained in a weird way. Like, we did spend the money on the exterior of the Sanctuary District, even though it was on the back lot. But we don't see a tremendous amount of San Francisco beyond the subway station and Brenner's office in the Sanctuary District. And we didn't try to be predictive. We didn't spend a lot of time like, the most we did was like, okay, well, news will mostly be on the internet, and people will connect even more on computers than they did. And the homeless problem will still be here and it'll be worse. I mean, that was about the extent of the militarizing the police, but that was already stuff that was starting to happen.
But see, that right there is partially part of the reason why people think Deep Space Nine is so great. Your focus was less on the technobabble and more about the actual story, the actual human experience and human nature, and which is the meat of everything. I mean, we all, the nerds, we all love like the technobabble, and it's true. We kind of pay attention sometimes, and sometimes we don't pay attention to the techno. But we go, all right, we get it. They're working on it. We get it. They're working on a solution. But back to the real story. There's LaCroix, and you guys. Absolutely. It comes through that the focus was on, making the points and telling the story and less about what silly gadgets we're going to have in 30 years.
Yeah. And I think a lot of science fiction, when it tries to be near future predictive, gets really into that kind of stuff. It gets really into like, even the Gibson books or Snow Crash, they get into like big changes in society and big changes in how we deal with the world and big, everybody's plugging into their heads into the computer directly and all that other stuff. And what I think the reason we were more accurate maybe was because we didn't try to do that. We didn't go for big changes. We were really talking about 1994 when we were talking about 2024. So everything we saw was just a tiny, like a little extension of 1994, just enough futurism to take a little of to make it a little less on the nose. But really what we cared about was the story of what Sisko and Bashir were going through and what the parallel story of what was happening with Dax and that and the loss of humanity for the people and like how it was affecting our characters. And so part of it is like we didn't put a lot of chips in that pot. So, it looks like we won big because we weren't really betting that big.
Well, you hinged this episode on the Bell riots. And how these riots basically make Starfleet what it is and start the course of direction of fixing the problems that we have. And I just thought that was an interesting takeaway on it because, at the end of this episode, we see Starfleet doesn't even exist because of the whatever course of events happen, as a result of them changing the timeline. But I just thought it was interesting to say that the riots were such a pivotal thing in the development of where we got to in the future. Mm-hmm. Almost saying that, hey, we need this look in the mirror. We need this time to kind of heal and outrage and voice our displeasure with things in order for us to now move forward into a place where we will get to this beautiful idea of Starfleet working together to explore and help the world, right?
Well, at the time, we were under the assumption that things would go on the way they had been going on for the last 30 years or so or more, which is that everyone got their news and got their information in the same way from the same people. We certainly weren't thinking about Fox News and CNN where people don't get the same news and the same spin on the news. So the idea that a single event, imagine today, the Bell riot, you'd have Fox demonizing the rioters, and I don't have to go into the politics of color and gender and all the stuff that they'd be playing with. You'd have CNN coming from a totally different angle, and everyone would be in their little bubbles, having made up their mind because they would have gotten their very specific point of view. But back then, there was still the idea that everyone was watching the same thing, the same news, getting the same information without all the editorializing. And so something where, and we'll talk about that next week, which was the big disappointment the biggest production disappointment of my 7 years on the show,
Wow, stay tuned for that.
But
Yeah.
the idea that it was going to be rubbed in people's faces of this Bell riot, it was what now looks like a very naive point of view that we had, but it's just how the world worked back then. We all were on the same page, and now, unfortunately, you could have a Bell riot, and it's still up in the air. What's happening now? Will there be change? Pulling down some statues, I'm all for it, but it is kind of a little bit off point of what we really need. Are there going to be changes in how the police, do their jobs? Is there going to be a difference? We're seeing now all the, everyone's pulling a fucking gun. Hello, America, everyone has a gun. You look at me the wrong way, I'm going to put a gun in your face. Are we going to live like this? Are we going to continue to live like this? Will there be difference or not? Will there be differences in November, or will we stay the course we're on? It's very, very complicated. It seemed a little bit more simpler back then. The Bell riot's the answer to everything,
Well, at least one of the beginnings of the answer. I mean, I think that was the idea, but yeah, I mean, on the other side, I think one of the things that is true or has been true historically, it may not be true anymore, is that major social changes usually don't happen without some sort of large incident like this.
Right.
The last time the LAPD did do some sort of reform was after the Rodney King riots.
92, I think.
Yeah, and then we're writing this 2 years after Rodney King, right? So it's not like you
didn't pull it out like the 1960s Watts riots.
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, like one of the pitches that I pitched to Next Generation that I did not sell was a time travel story where Picard and Geordi were in the Watts riots, and so this was a little bit of that too. But we had just lived through the Rodney King riots, and so it looked like there might be some changes out of that. I don't know. I mean, obviously not enough, and the civil rights movement was was a huge and sustained effort, which included rioting, included massive protests and all that stuff to get some change in this country. So the idea that a giant riot where hundreds of people died might change the world a little bit. Maybe it's a little naive, unfortunately, like Ira said, but that's what we were going for.
Well, I know you guys weren't shooting to be, psychics or predicting the future, and that's not what you do. You write stories, you tell stories. But I mean, if I pull out the lines from this episode, one of the lines was, "Jobs are hard to come by given the economy." Check. District security got their budget cut. Check.
We need a graphic, man. I wish I knew how to do graphics.
Europe is falling apart. Student protests in France. Check. I mean, I don't know how many of these things I can go down the list, but literally, I mean, it's just like, I just kept saying, check. Man, it feels like I'm watching, like it's so relevant. And that to me is one of the great, just in storytelling in general, is when I can watch it at any given time. And, I can watch this 20 years from now, 40, 50, 100 years from now, and it'll still make sense. It'll still resonate. It'll still be relevant to the current issues, the headlines of the day. And that's what I think that you guys have done so brilliantly on Deep Space Nine, from Far Beyond the Stars to this, just so many different episodes, that they still stay relevant. They still mean something to people. And they still resonate with the audience who says, "Wow, this totally relates to me," or "This relates to the times that I'm in."
Well, that's wonderful, but I mean that sincerely. But I think Robert would agree. We spent a lot more time discussing how the hell they were time traveling than we did about whether there was student riots. Seriously, I'm not saying that as a joke. All that stuff that you're talking about, that kind of flowed you know, we weren't pulling our hair out about, you know, how we were making that history. That was kind of fun to come up with those little ideas and thoughts, just following the bouncing ball. Once you have sanctuary districts and the homeless and encampments, it's not that difficult to come up with other things that would be happening around the same time. So, you know, that was just kind of fun, I think, right?
That stuff was fun. I mean, look, and you know, it's also, there's a little bit of a Nostradamus effect where, like, we said a lot of stuff in there, and thank you for picking the ones that were, you know, but like there was also like the Caribbean Union or whatever it was, you know, there was like
the Pan-Caribbean.
Pan-Caribbean Union and like neo-Trotsky is controlling United Europe.
That was the line I wanted to cover. I thought that was
I wrote that
honestly
down too.
that was the coolest line. The two lines in there, because you said something about the neo-Trotskys, and then the lady says, "Well, nothing that the Gaullists couldn't handle, or the Gaullists didn't have that." And I immediately, I don't know if you guys, doesn't sound like you spent a ton of time on that. It's just kind of like, well, what would make sense? But to me, I'm thinking, okay, that is still also something that I could see that could happen 4 years from now. Neo-Trotsky sounds like, you know, communist, super far left. Then you have the Gaullists. Now, Gaul is what France was called way before it was called France. It's like the people that, you know, originally came up. And so maybe those are like the far right people trying to stay pure. I don't know if that's how you meant it.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that was the idea. But, you know, again, like that stuff is like stuff that Ira and I are coming up with where we're sitting at the keyboard, like just typing like little fiends, you know? And so that stuff is just, a lot of that is like throwaway. I'm not saying we put no thought into it, but I would say we put about as much thought of it as we put into, like, you know, you can't free a fish from water, you know, the Ferengi rule of acquisition.
Yeah.
You know, the things that we labored over, as Ira said, we were forced to labor over the tech, but the things we actually labored over willingly were the character stories and the structure of the story and the emotional beats and the sort of larger drive of the show. And, you know, the stuff that you got that people are, you know, get excited about, like that, the student riots and stuff like that, where, you know, as a friend of mine calls it, they were chrome, you know, they're not the car. The car runs without that. You know, it's the
shiny stuff.
It's the shiny stuff on the outside that you don't really need. It just makes the car look a little better. So yeah, I mean, those things are fun though. Like as a writer, those things are fun to come up with. It's fun to come up with the Grand Negus's nephew's name and decide what color the oceans are on Bajor and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I just want to say, you know, just because we're here, and so I get nostalgic. You know, at that point, even though it was still kind of early in the game or middle of the game, whatever, but by that point, Robert and I had spent a lot of time together, let's just say, and we functioned, you know, very well together. You know, it wasn't like we had one mind. We both brought different things to the party, but we had a lot of fun being in the room together. You know, I mean, there were not a lot of times where we were silent and pacing and nothing, you know, it was a lot of give and take. And so that energy, I think, was incredibly positive in terms of just getting the work done. And I think certainly a lot of the relationships in Deep Space Nine and the focus on the relationships in Deep Space Nine came about without meaning to, but just came about our relationship and how well we worked together and how easy at times it was. That not that the results were always great, but getting there, you know, was not, you know, painful most of the time. Sometimes, sure. And so I think, you know, a lot of the things that work in the episode work because, yes, the chronoton particles I keep bringing up because that still pisses me off. But a lot of it just flowed from who we were and the fact that, you know, we had the same idea of what it meant to be a good human being and what it meant to be a good friend. And I think that's reflected a lot, not just in the shows we wrote, but in the entire series.
You know, it also makes me think too when I see an episode like this, which is great, but it also seems self-contained, and it's not part of the larger Dominion wars and the Jemadar and all the other things that we're seeing starting to get explored. Do you throw these episodes in the middle somewhere and say, hey, we need an episode here, and it doesn't have to fit the whole Dominion story arc? Or like, how does that process work for you? Like, how do you place this episode here?
Well, I mean, at this point, you know, we were still, what'd you say this was, episode 11?
11.
Season 3, episode 11 and 12, yeah.
Okay, so it was still in the first half of season 3, you know, and the Dominion, you know, a lot of the heavy lifting was in season 2 in terms of the planning and all that stuff. So we, you know, nothing was written in stone at that point. You know, we were still plotting. I certainly Rick was not aware, you know, where we were hoping ultimately to take the Dominion. You know, we got the Defiant at the start of the season. That was a big win. That wasn't an easy win. So it wasn't like we were that serialized at that point, that it was, you know, like we were breaking form and all in order to do these episodes. But I have to be honest, whenever I saw those homeless people in Santa Monica, that's what really gave that, now's the time to do it, because now I'm starting to see the episode, you know. And now we're going to actually do it. And it could have been episode 11. It could have been episode 21. I mean, it was just, that was the day that it all clicked, you know. And once it clicked, you know, and everyone,
I mean, that's how, I mean, when you do 26 episodes a year, you go for what feels right at the moment. And you know that, like, if we don't get to the Dominion in these 2 episodes, or we barely mention them, we'll get to them eventually again. You know, even if you take out, you know, we had 14 episodes left to do after these 2. Mm-hmm. So, you know, however much larger story we needed to tell, we get to it. We knew with confidence we'd get to it, you know. So when a great idea came up that felt like it was a standalone, even later on, even like Far Beyond the Stars, you know, or Field of Fire, you know, like that was season 7. It's like the idea comes at the moment. You're like, we need an episode. This one sounds good. Let's do it. It won't move the plot forward, but that's okay. And we'll get to it. Or we'll put little things into it, you know? So it wasn't like, it was a sort of more organic and free-flowing thing than like trying to meticulously structure all 26 episodes to all tell one continuous story. We were just like, let's tell a good story this week. Next week, let's also tell a good story. Some of those stories will involve the Dominion, you know?
And all of them will involve the characters. And the one thing we did do very well is that the characters changed and grew episode to episode. The characters were serialized from the beginning. I don't think Mike and Rick even realized that was just ingrained in the DNA. They put that in there for us. And that's what that's why it was fun to go to work every day, because you knew you were telling their story. And that was more important than the Dominion. It was more important than anything, because Cisco was changing, Kira was changing, Odo was changing. Everyone had a story. Every character, including the recurring characters. That's what made the show different.
I mean, this is a great episode for Dax, you know? This is a really, the 2-parter for Dax, it's a really interesting story that she goes through. And the sort of awareness. It's interesting watching it again, how Dax is so glib to lie. Like, she's so easy. It's so easy for her to just like,
she flipped the switch so fast.
I know how to manipulate this guy. You know, I've got 200 years of experience. I can pull this shit out of my, I can pull this out. And which was really fun. And it's a big growth episode for Bashir. It's an episode where Cisco, I think, grows too. And that was really, for us, that was really the serialization. Always. Like, that was always the thing that, like, we were trying to build on week to week to week.
Right.
You know?
Good point. That it is a fabulous episode for Bashir. It really is. I mean, it's another one of those episodes where you know, any of those people who had a problem with whatever they had about Bashir or how he wrote him at the beginning, which was, you know, the beginning of the arc. But this is a guy who's growing in front of your eyes, and all his mind is clicking. You know, there wasn't a big difference in certain ways between Jake and Bashir. I know there's an age difference, but they were both the two characters who were really coming of age during the 7 years. And just like you see the growth in Jake, you know, just obviously just in terms of how the size and everything else, but how he's changing and developing, you know, a moral center and his own attitudes. You really see it with Bashir, who starts out with, you know, frontier medicine and being on, you know, all this glib shit. He starts to become a man. He becomes a thoughtful guy who's suddenly realizing there's a lot going on that he needs to understand, that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. And these two episodes are really good for him.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. We're already out of time, but we could totally listen to you guys talk forever. It's so fascinating hearing you guys talk about this, honestly. And it's a real honor to have you.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank you for sharing the insight on the process, because there's so many things here in this episode, and I'm sure I'm looking forward to the next part of this episode. I don't know how it ends, so
it's so cool. It's so cool that Sirach hasn't watched any of these. I love it.
I know. He's not the only
Mr. Not appearing in these episodes, Sirach Lofton.
Yeah.
Ira, did you just say he's not the only one?
Well, no. I mean, I know a lot of actors on the show.
Oh, I thought you meant yourself.
No. I mean, I saw the shows. I just haven't seen them in 20 plus years. But I know actors who are very, very identified with Deep Space Nine, who have not seen a lot of shows that they have not been in. So to have Sirach really be like a stand-in for all the actors, let's put it that way, and experiencing this is really fascinating to watch. You know, to really see. And I'm sorry that Aaron isn't here to undergo it well, because it's fascinating to look back and to have been a part of something, but yet only being a specific part of it. And now suddenly you're seeing the whole, and we're watching it happen, you know, as Sirach is watching it happen. So it's
big picture.
Very interesting to see.
It's very fun. Awesome.
Thanks for bringing up Aaron, by the way. Yeah, I mean, he would have loved this. He did one season with us, and he loved every minute of it. We loved every minute of it with him. And there isn't an episode that goes by that we don't think about him while we're watching an episode and while we're recording one. And, you know, we're always wishing, God, he would have loved this scene, or, oh man, he would have razzed me about that mistake today, or something. He's always popping up, you know, so it's great to always hear him be spoken about.
Well, yeah, I mean, the seventh rule, anytime I see it written or I see a Twitter post by Sirach or by you, anytime I see the word the seventh rule, I think of Aaron. And so, but not in the past. It's like it's keeping him alive now. You know, it's a thing. So it's a good thing.
That's our hope.
Yeah.
Man.
Great. Well, thanks very much, guys. Again, it's been a complete honor. We love having you guys. We love talking with you. We love picking your brilliant minds and hearing. It's like more storytelling. It's like storytelling about storytelling. It's amazing.
Robert, have a good trip. Stay safe.
Yeah, you stay safe too. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, my friend.
Thanks very much. And everybody at home, as Ira just mentioned, always remember the seventh rule.